Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss a bit of a mad ramble from a Northern Ireland Brexiteer who seems to be taking issue with a Tory Brexiteer in a spat which just goes to highlight what I've pointed out for a few years. Brexit was promoted by different groups who all had different objectives. Now that Brexit has been delivered in some form, that unity has been shattered, and that bodes well for moves towards rejoining. So this little rant takes the form of a published letter from Jamie Bryson, who's a prominent unionist in Northern Ireland and a supporter of Brexit. However, like a lot of unionist Brexiteers, Mr. Bryson is not at all happy about the way Brexit has actually turned out, like most other Brexiteers. And in his latest statement, he's particularly upset with Steve Baker, the junior minister in the Northern Ireland office. He has published a letter which calls out what he believes is a bit of Brexit hypocrisy from Baker, that he talked about freedom from the EU and yet is now committed to a system of moving goods between Britain and Northern Ireland, which includes post-Brexit freedoms in order to keep the EU happy. In reality, though, the UK government are not at all keen on a full-blown trade war with the EU, but this is essentially about maintaining the peace process. And it was always going to be thus. People tried to say, yeah, Northern Ireland after Brexit's going to look quite different. They wouldn't listen. But nonetheless, Bryson is upset that Steve Baker, this arch Brexiteer, does not seem to be all that bothered that Northern Ireland gets the same supposed freedoms of Brexit that Britain has. And in that, he may have a point. But this just highlights a truism of Brexit for me, which may have implications for the future direction of our relationship with the EU. I've said for a long time now, there were a lot of different anti-EU groups behind Brexit. And I don't just mean from international Brexiteers like the Kremlin. I mean within the UK, several different Brexit groups with different motivations for leaving the EU and therefore a different post-Brexit vision. So whenever people have suggested to me, oh, Brexit was because of this or because of that, I say, well, you know, there's an individual Brexiteer may have had like one motivation for leaving, but collectively their reasons were many, and as we can now see, sometimes contradictory. For quite a while, these different Brexit groups were ranged against each other. They would argue about what post-Brexit Britain should look like. It wasn't called Brexit then, really, you know, but what Britain should do, what the UK should do after leaving the EU. Then they would just argue with each other. No, we don't want that. So then they realised they'll get nowhere in opposition to one another. So they agreed to drop their differences and work together on what they did agree on. And all they did agree on was that leaving the EU would be a brilliant idea. This is why in the run-up to the Brexit referendum, there was never a plan published for the roadmap for Brexit, what we should do, what the steps should be taken. Because had any group done that, it would have invited conflict with the other groups. So they just talked about various outcomes. Oh, cheaper food, cheaper clothes, better trade deals, yeah, better jobs, better NHS, without ever bothering to say how the outcomes would be achieved. But remember, the only thing uniting these different groups was a common desire to leave the EU. That was it. Well, the UK has now left the EU, so there is no more reason for these different groups to remain united, other than to ward off the possibility of a major rejoin campaign growing. Indeed, the first fault lines appeared before we left, a few months before we left. Boris Johnson managed to come up with a form of Brexit, which he thought he could get through Parliament. As it turns out, he was correct. The DUP looked in horror at the way it would fundamentally make Northern Ireland very different to the rest of the UK. They looked at it and went, no, this is even worse than Theresa May's deal. But it was too late. They'd lost their power to change course. And the biggest schisms within the Brexit supporting community have been in Northern Ireland. Like even Ben Habib pops over to Belfast when he wants to have a whine about Brexit because that's where emotions run strongest. But there are schisms in Britain as well between the likes of the gobshites like Nigel Farage and Ben Habib, who would never have had any input into the implementation, with those who did implement Brexit within the Conservative Party. And then you've got those schisms within the Conservative Party itself between those who wanted the trade war with the EU and those who didn't won out in the end. And it occurs to me that this could be an interesting factor in the campaign to rejoin the EU, because it's natural to suppose the rejoin campaign is going to essentially be a grassroots campaign. It's really all it can be. We haven't got like friendly billionaires here, right? So it's difficult to attract as much funding as the pro-Brexit campaigns. You know, that the Brexiteers have the money, they own the media as well, which means that they have tentative control over a lot of the public narrative as a result. So it'll be tough to take them on in a concerted campaign, and we can't just rely on the general public to realise that Brexit is a dead duck of their own accord. You know, it's been extremely galling that the news media not only platform Brexiteers, but never those of us on the other side. But they also actively edit out reports criticising Brexit. We all had the stories in 2021 particularly, where the BBC were caught cutting out clips of various business people citing the problems of Brexit. But like yesterday, there was another example yesterday. The BBC reported on another £500 million Brexit cost, also related to Northern Ireland as it happens. And it was in the Northern Ireland politics section. Absolutely fine. I haven't got a problem with that. There was a lot of news yesterday. I certainly wouldn't have expected it to be headline news. However, it was not even listed it was in the Northern Ireland politics section, but it was not listed on the Northern Ireland politics homepage where they put like the most recent stories. There were articles from days earlier taking centre stage, but not this new article that was just published yesterday about Brexit. Still not there now. Never appeared. So you could only find it by searching for it. Imagine where public opinion would be if the media gave as much time to Remainers and Rejoiners as it does Brexiteers. But this is the hand we've been dealt. It's going to be tough. But it occurs to me that when we can finally get a real push towards the big steps needed to reverse Brexit, such as, you know, rejoining the customs union, for example, that we might not be up against the same level of opposition as we had before Brexit. Because various Brexit groups have become disunited, we may find that they're weaker. For example, although the DUP are right-wing Brexiteers and therefore much more in line with the Conservative Party than anyone else, they're actually more keen on the prospect of a Labour government than the current Conservative government. That is because Labour want to form agreements with the EU that would reduce that trade friction between Britain and Northern Ireland, make a lot of the visible signs of division go away. It would involve reversing the hard Brexit, but it would mean fewer visible signs of a wall between Northern Ireland and Britain. And so the DUP support that. You know, there are Brexiteers who got what they wanted with Brexit. There are Brexiteers who are on the path, but they want more. Their next step is leaving the the Council of Europe, quite frankly, really. But they want us to leave the European Convention on Human Rights. There are also Brexiteers who now think we'd have been better off not leaving at all, however. You know, against a rejoin campaign, we may well find that the Brexiteers will consider not what Brexit might be, because that's what they did in 2016. They all had their own vision of a post-Brexit Britain, and it was all different to each other. But because they didn't talk about it, because that was the thing they disagreed on, they all carried on thinking, oh yeah, this is what Brexit will be like, this is what Brexit will be like. But what it realistically will be, that's what they now have to think, because they've had to come to terms with that. There could only be one Brexit. At any one time, there can only be one vision of Brexit in place. And some are now deciding that being inside the EU is going to be better than the reality of Brexit, because they realise that they don't have the power to bring about their vision of Brexit. Because despite what Theresa May said, Brexit means Brexit. Brexit was very different things to very different people. Only a small number are happy with the Brexit we got, which means by definition that there never was a majority for Brexit, really, because there could never be a majority for a specific version of Brexit that we could ever get. So Brexit never had a majority and never could. And now that some people are realising this, maybe it never could again. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching. Until next time, see you later.